Good day to our research advisor, Professor Ronnie O. Juliano, to our panelists, Dr. Teresa Castro, Dr. Marlon Rupino, and Dr. Marvic Villegas, and also to our research teacher, Professor Reynaldo Cagual. I'm Rolly Limos, the leader of Team EcoEd, and I want to greet you all a pleasant day. We will be presenting our research study entitled The Effects of COVID-19 Pandemic to the Gross Domestic Products of the Philippines, together with my co-researchers, Mr. Jaymark Brin, Ms. NICOLE Castro, Ms. BIANCA Marie Daques, Mr. John Ivan de la Cruz, Ms. TRISHA GUADILLA, and Ms. ERICCA. Things happen unexpectedly, and this COVID-19 or coronavirus was first identified in December 2019 in Wuhan city of China, and day by day, the virus easily spread around the world. According to the World Bank 2020, the Philippines had been placed on the severe community quarantine that leads on a major negative effect in the Philippine economy that resulted in a sharp drop in employment, products, and services. But before the COVID-19 crisis, according to the International Trade Administration 2021, Philippine economy was one of the world's best performers with an average growth rate of 6.6% from the 2012 to 2019. However, by implementing a total lockdown for the several months, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, the gross domestic product is become negative 0.7% in the first quarter of 2019 to 2020, and it dropped to negative 17% during the second quarter. Among these studies, it will help the researchers to evaluate on how the effect of COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippine gross domestic product.
Thank you, Mr. Rolly Limos, for presenting the introduction and background of the study. I am Jaymark, and let's now proceed to the statement of the problem. The purpose of the study was to enlighten people about the effects of COVID-19 pandemic to the gross domestic product in the Philippines. And the problem is stated to have a clear and concise representation of the issue that needed to be addressed. And giving all the statements that are mentioned, the researchers seek to find answers to the following questions. First, how may the Philippine gross domestic product be described before and during the pandemic? Second, when does the Philippine gross domestic product decreases during the pandemic? Third, what is the gap in gross domestic product status before and during the COVID-19 pandemic? Last but not the least, what plans and actions had been implemented by the Philippine government to resolve problem in gross domestic product caused by COVID-19 pandemic? I'm done with my part. And now, here's ERICCA to present the theoretical framework of the study.
Thank you, Mr. Jaymark Brin, for presenting the statement of the problem of the study. And I'm ERICCA, and let me discuss to you the theoretical framework of the study. It is consist of relevant variables of the study and maps out how they might relate to each other. In our study, it is consist of three phases, which are input, process, and expected output from the study. Input, it includes 1. How may the gross domestic product in the Philippines to describe before and during the pandemic. 2. When does the Philippine gross domestic product decrease during pandemic? 3. What is the gap in the gross domestic product status before and during the COVID-19 pandemic? 4. What plans and actions had been implemented by Philippine government to resolve problem to the gross domestic product caused by COVID-19 pandemic? The process, data mining was used to collect information from the legitimate sources. The output, it is the level of affected gross domestic product due to COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, note the plans and action of government to recover the Philippine GDP. And now, here is Mr. John Ivan de la Cruz to present the research design of this study.
Thank you, Ms. ERICCA for presenting the theoretical framework. I'm Jan Ivan de la Cruz, and now we are here in research design. The researcher used the quantitative method of research in this study. It is the process of collecting and analyzing numerical data. It can be used to find patterns and averages, make prediction, test causal relationship, generalize result to wider population, and as it deals with numerical values that used to know the percentage of gross domestic product in the Philippines. May I call on Ms. Nicole Castro to present the summary of findings.
Thank you, Mr. John Ivan de la Cruz, for the informative research design. I am Nicole B. Castro, and now, let us proceed for our summary of findings. Based on the data gathered, the following were drawn. As you can see in the figure, it depicts the year-on-year growth rate of gross domestic product in the fourth quarter of 2017-2018 at 6.3%. which increased to 6.4% in the fourth quarter of 2018-2019. The primary sources of percentage growth were motor vehicles trade and repair, motorcycles, personal and household goods, manufacturing, agriculture, and constructions. This graph shows the Philippine GDP of negative 8.3% in the fourth quarter of 2020, with a full year growth rate of negative 9.5% in 2020. GDP growth fell by negative 8.3% in the fourth quarter of 2019-2020. Construction contributed negative 25.3%, other services contributed negative 45.2%, and accommodation and food services activities contributed negative 42.7%. The figure presents the negative 0.7% GDP in the first quarter of 2019-2020. During the second quarter, it fell to negative 17%. From there, it gradually increased to negative 14.4%, negative 8.3%, and finally to negative 4.2% in the first quarter of 2020-2021. The figure 5 represents quarterly gross domestic product growth in ASEAN countries. The pandemic's effects were felt for the first time in the second quarter of 2020. Because of the base effect from that period, regional economies will find it easier to record yearly growth in the current quarter. Malaysia and Philippines dropped to negative 17 in the second quarter of 2020 among these ASEAN countries. Malaysia, on the other hand, recovered faster than the Philippines. The figure 6 depicts the Philippines' gross domestic product from 2019 to 2022. There were 5.9, 5.6, 6.3, and 6.6 with a total of 24.4% from the first to fourth quarters of 2019. The first to fourth quarters of 2021, on the other hand, had negative 3.9, 12, 6.9, and 7.7% for a total of 22.7%. The gap was calculated by subtracting the average for each year. The total GDP percentage was 0.4. And for the conclusion, here is Ms. Bianca DAQUIS.
Thank you, Ms. Nicole Castro, for discussing the summary of findings. I am Bianca DAQUIS, and now let's proceed to the conclusion. Based from the findings of the study, the following conclusions were drawn. Number 1. Thus, the gross domestic product or GDP of the Philippines was affected by COVID-19. The implementation of protocols and a lot of forced closed establishments resulted to decrease in gross domestic product or the GDP. Number 2, the researchers conclude that the second quarter of 2020 was the first period in which they felt the effects of pandemic. Because of the base of effect from that period, it will be easier for the regional economies to record yearly growth in the current quarter. Number 3, the implementation of total lockdown for several months, particularly in second quarter of 2019 to 2020. Effects of gross domestic product decrease of 17%. Number 4, hence, in decreasing GDP of the Philippines due to COVID-19 pandemic, the government implemented plans and action to avoid another 17% GDP decreased occurrence. And now, may I call TRISHA GUADILLA to present the recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Bianca Marie DAQUIS, for presenting the conclusion. I am TRISHA GUADILLA, and now let me present to you the last section of our study, the recommendation. This study could help the Philippine government and communities increase their gross domestic product. The following recommendations are made based on the findings and conclusions. Work from home. As coronavirus cases have surged, many Filipinos stopped their work. The government decided to conduct a work from home for the continuation of their jobs. It is a great way to alleviate not only the lack of employment, but also to contribute to economic growth. Support locals. Through supporting local products or services will help to reduce the engagement of many residents and avoid interacting to each other. According to the National Resource Defense Council, buying local will help reduce pollution, improve air quality, and improve our health. The local economy can contribute by bringing growth and innovation to the community where the business is established. Government support. In the times of pandemic, the government must support especially our local farmer. They need to do something about the product that the local farmers provide. The government should be the responsible for the proper distribution of our products, and by that, no product will be wasted. Following protocols. This small action can have a big impact. Simply adhering to the government's health protocols will help to prevent the spread of the virus, allowing us to gradually return to normalcy while also increasing GDP. That would be the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening in the presentation of our research study. And the floor is now open for questions.